Well, good evening. I'm Ramiro Salazar. I'm the director of the San Antonio Public Library. On behalf of the staff here at Forest Hills Branch Library, I want to extend to you a very warm welcome to this evening's program. It is my pleasure to have the opportunity actually to introduce to you our very special guest speaker, Mr. Henry Muñoz III. As you know, we're celebrating National Hispanic Heritage Month, the second part of September and the first part of October. However, we generally celebrate September and October. And we have programs throughout the library system. We have 28 library locations, including the central. So we have programs in most of the library locations. This year, we decided to, as part of National Hispanic Heritage Month, to not only offer opportunities for the public to learn more about the contributions of Hispanics and Latinos to American society, but we are also honoring the legacy of Henry B. Gonzalez. He would have been 100 this past May. And it's my pleasure to recognize Congressman Charlie Gonzalez, former Congressman. Welcome. Last week we had a wonderful program with State Representative Diego Bernal talking about his father's legacy. So tonight we're very happy to have one of the nation's leading experts on Latino culture and identity in American society. Henry, Mr. Muñoz is one of the nation's most respected voices on the subject of Latino artistry, creativity, design, and cultural impact. Tonight he's joining us to share with us his thoughts about the advancements of Latinos, the contributions of Latinos, and the future of Latinos. So please help me welcome Mr. Henry Muñoz.
That was so nice, it made me nervous. This is a room full of people with whom I have spent most of my life and with whom I've collaborated on a series of, I wouldn't say projects, but advancements for my hometown and for the state and for the country, and of that I'm really proud. So this is a conversation really about family, and I've always loved libraries. I remember that my second grade teacher, Mrs. Mendez, called my mom one day because she couldn't find me for a couple of hours, and she found me behind the stacks in the library at Blessed Sacrament Parish School back on Oblate. I don't know what I was looking at, but probably National Geographic. But I've always loved libraries because I love storytelling, and tonight is about storytelling. So if you can hear me, maybe I'll just walk around. Hey, Chris, can you get to the next one? Can you go back for a minute? So I really love the idea that this is a period of time where we're going to honor the legacy of Henry B. Gonzalez, because in that moment of storytelling, I realized that the story of San Antonio and the story of my father and the story of Henry B. Gonzalez and this community were all interwoven. And really this is about, you can turn off, that's okay. I hope nobody falls asleep. But
Shut the door?
no, I think that's good.
Yeah.
So, because at the end of the day, particularly in a moment in time where cultural understanding could not be more important to the future of this country, San Antonio has always played a special role in bringing people together and advancing the idea that Latinos have always been important to this country before, quite honestly, we were the United States of America. And that's what this talk, A Tale of Two Henrys, is about. Go to the next slide. I bet you didn't know, there used to be a Hispanic Heritage Day, so we really were only worth a day. And then in 1988, President Reagan decided that there should be a Hispanic Heritage Month. But did you know that the person who first came up with the idea of Hispanic Heritage Month is this man right here? And he's from San Antonio. He moved back to San Antonio. He lives here now. His name is Gil Coronado. So Hispanic Heritage Month was born out of the brain power of a San Antonian. Thought that's important for you guys to know. Okay. And a couple of years ago, my sister Emily brought this into the office. I have a cousin who was, I guess he must love Ancestry.com. And nobody in my family had ever done that. It's very fascinating what you can find on the internet nowadays. But this is the entry paperwork for my grandfather. It's important because it says that my grandfather, Enrique, was moving to San Antonio because he was a printer, a linotype operator, and he was coming to work at a Spanish language newspaper in San Antonio called La Prensa. So basically, like many people who moved to San Antonio back in the 1920s, really as because they were fleeing the revolution in Mexico, because they saw a better life for themselves and for their family here in San Antonio. My grandfather was one of those, and he had a job. Right? And many years later, it's funny, but when my sister Emily sent this to me, I was sitting in a lobby of a hotel in Washington, D.C., talking to a woman by the name of Monica Lozano, whose father was the founder of La Prensa in San Antonio. You can go to the next one. So this is my father and his grandmother. Next. And one of the things that my father was the proudest of was the fact that was his sense of patriotism. He was a decorated war veteran in World War II and used his position as a soldier to finance his education. Next. And back in the early 1960s, about the time just after I was born, graduated from St. Mary's University here in San Antonio. He used to tell us that we could go anywhere that we wanted to college as long as it was Catholic, I think because he wanted one of us to go to St. Mary's. None of us did. Oh no, my sister Aurora actually ended up going to St. Mary's Law School, but there he is. He was the first person in his family to graduate from college, and he put himself through school also as a printer at the San Antonio Light newspaper and as a motion picture projectionist at places like the Alameda here in San Antonio. Next. And this is not my family. This is Charlie's family. And so the other part of this is that Charlie's Gonzalez's grandfather, the father of Henry B. Gonzalez, moved to San Antonio about the same time, in about 1921, to manage La Prensa. So my grandfather and Charlie's grandfather were colleagues at the same newspaper. And his son, Henry B. Gonzalez, also went to college and graduated from law school at St. Mary's University. And his first recognition was which he never lost, was as a tireless voice for the community of San Antonio and for Mexican Americans, really before there wasn't a voice. I think it's easy to forget that not so long ago, 50, 60 years ago, San Antonio was a segregated community. If your last name was Gonzalez or Muñoz or Salazar, you couldn't really live where you wanted to live. And my uncle Serapio told me a story I'd never heard about my father. His stepfather went and got him in Laredo, Texas, and brought him to live here in Seguin. And my father was a troublemaker from the very beginning. And back then, there were restaurants that were white only. And so my father would make my uncle challenge the white only signs and go eat where Mexicans and Mexican Americans were not welcome. I think that's important to remember, that really until after World War II, and because of the patriotism of the veterans returning from World War II, and the idea that you could not deny great Americans a place to live or a place to eat. That San Antonio began its movement towards a place of unification. Henry B. Gonzalez was a person who never failed to use his voice to spotlight those places where there was injustice. And the first place that he became known for that was in the state capitol, not in the United States Capitol. Next. But there he is in the United States Capitol. I remember they used to have a Sunday morning talk show. And this was so long ago that there used to only be 4 channels, ladies, right? And one of the channels, like, I guess I was bored on Sunday morning, but I used to love to watch his television show. But that's not the first time I remember seeing Henry B. Gonzalez. Next. I think I was 3 years old, but I remember that my parents took me to Broadway Street, where the motorcade of President John F. Kennedy was traveling down. Like, you know how when you're a little kid and you have this kind of vague memory of something that happened, you can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember being out in the open on Broadway when the motorcade came by, and that Henry B. Gonzalez was in that motorcade. Next. And this was the welcome in downtown San Antonio for the President of the United States the day before he was assassinated. Pretty incredible. That's Houston Street, right by the Gunner Hotel. And there is Henry B. Gonzalez and Henry Muñoz Jr. standing on a stage with the Vice President of the United States. Think about that. In the span of one generation, from immigration papers to first generation college students, there were 2 Henrys sitting on the same stage as the Vice President of the United States. And when you celebrate the legacy of Henry B. Gonzalez, you need to remember that the job creation and the innovation and the technology that for many years we took it for granted in San Antonio. For example, Brooks Air Force Base, which really was the center of the aerospace industry in the United States, was here in San Antonio in many ways, along with Kelly Air Force Base, because of the voice of Henry B. Gonzalez. At the same time that Henry Muñoz used his voice for the workers that in many ways were not listened to during that period of time in the history of San Antonio and of this country. Next. And that affected my story. This is a picture from exactly 50 years ago in the state of Texas, when economic development looked like $1.25 a minimum wage. And this is a rally just outside of the gates of the state capitol. And that little boy right there is Henry Muñoz III. I was 6 years old. Next. And this is a very famous photograph of that same day, standing on the steps of the state capitol with the migrant farm workers demanding that the governor of Texas, John Connally, come out and greet them and have a conversation with them about these working conditions. But what I love about this photograph is not only that my mom and my brother are in this photograph, but the incredible display of American spirit and hard work in the faces of these activists who had walked all the way from Rio Grande City to the Capitol in Austin for justice. Next. And I would be remiss, particularly today, if I didn't remember and tell you that 50% of my spirit of activism I got from my mom's side of the family. So tonight at 9:30, on PBS, there will be a documentary on the life of my cousin, Willie Velasquez, who is related to me not from the Muñoz side of my family, but from the Molina side of my family, and who was the first person. He was an incredible orator. I mean, it's about as good as I've ever heard somebody speak. And he was the first person who told me that I had a voice, and what did he tell me? Henry, one day you'll have a voice, you ought to think about what you want to say with it. And there's Willie. And Willie rose over his brief life to have the ear of a person who would have been the President of the United States. In fact, the Democratic nominee for president in this year in 1988 flew back to San Antonio at the height of a presidential campaign to eulogize Willie Velasquez. So think about the role of San Antonians in forming this idea of what democracy is like in the 21st century. Next. And this is a not so famous photograph of Henry B. Gonzalez's son, Charlie Gonzalez, who had a respected career in Congress, standing outside of a courtroom with Henry Muñoz, the son of Henry Muñoz, working with very little fanfare, working on a project that would never see the light of day, a public transportation project, but united really by this tradition of that there's a beauty in democracy, there's a design to the way that we live, both culturally, in infrastructure, in architecture, in social media today, to try and do what I was taught by my father, and I know Charlie was taught by his father, which is it's always best to try and be a person for others. Next. And that's really what led me to my work nationally. I realized that, quite honestly, there wasn't enough libraries or museums or archives that told the story of our people. And I mean that in terms of you never can really tell the American story until you tell the complete American story, right? So if your grandparents aren't in the history books, and your grandparents aren't in the history books, and my grandparents aren't in the history books, then you're really only telling a part of who we really are as a nation. And the only way that can change is to believe about yourself that your talent and your history and your heritage and who you are as a people, believe that it deserves to be celebrated for more than 1 month out of the year, and that you have incredible power. And for me, while it is kind of a picture of a bro hug between the president, who's my boss, has been my boss for the last 3.5 years, it's really about the moment when everyday heroes who fight for their community and believe in the person down the street gets to speak truth to power. Next. And for me, I found that I would never have been a good politician, I don't think. I tried it once as transportation commissioner for the state of Texas, and I was a little too impatient. But I think I've always been a good cultural activist, and I realized that the direction of the country and the population of this country was trending in a way in which who we are and our stories needed to be reflected in every way. And because I had been, by this point, working in architecture for almost 20 years, the built environment seemed like the perfect place to begin. This project, which is the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center expansion, was important for a number of different reasons, but it was important to me personally because the very first time that I tried to design was on a project, Steve will remember this, was on a project affiliate. It was a part of this project. It was the Mexican,
Cultural Institute.
no, it wasn't the Cultural Institute, it was the International Center. And so we had this, what I really liked it, was this great design for the International Center, which at the time was supposed to be in the middle of Hemisphere Park, and there was a group of people who really didn't want a building in Hemisphere Park, and we designed, Steve and I and John Kell had this idea for a hyperbolic paraboloid wall, which was a big, long, curved wall, and there was a critic who worked at the San Antonio Express News, and the timing of that design was a week, I think it got unveiled a week before, does anybody, you all aren't old enough, but the peso crashed, right? The peso crashed back in the mid-1990s. And so the columnists at the San Antonio Express News started referring to that design as the Leaning Tower of Pesos. And it was the first time I was kind of used to reading controversial things about myself in the newspaper about myself, but I wasn't really used to reading about our firm, the design firm, as having failed. So I was lucky that I had a mentor who was not living in San Antonio, but who now lives in San Antonio by the name of Tomasi Barafrasto, who basically said, look, you need to find one thing about every single project that you do and explore it and embrace it, and after 20 years, you'll have something that you can be really proud of. So I'm very proud of the Riverwalk and its entrance to the Henry B. Gonzalez Convention Center. This for me was a building that in many small ways tells the story of us as a community. So we knew, for example, that we had thousands and thousands and thousands. I was afraid to do any more big statements. But we had thousands, Steve and I worked on this, we had thousands of feet of carpeting. So when you walk through the convention center, it tells the story of who we are. It has maps, it has beautiful dresses from the Escaramuza and patterns, it has the aquifer. You know, it really was, okay, here is a small detail with a lot of space where we can celebrate who we are. Taught me a big lesson about how to mine, if you will, the identity of a people or a community, even in the smallest fashion. Next. Collaboration of Ramiro Salazar and myself and Jeff Edwards in my office, and Steve Tillotson, and who else is in the room tonight who might have worked on that? And artists. One of the things I first learned is that architects don't know everything. And architecture is for people, and design is everywhere. Everything in this room, from her dress to that camera, is design. And it was important as we progressed along this 20-year exploration to let other people design who actually use the buildings and to be a part of the storytelling of these buildings. I'm very proud of this. It won in the last year one of the few, I think maybe the only national AIA award ever won for a library in San Antonio, and that award was was an award from the American Institute of Architects. We were there together, and the American Library Association. So it is a testament not only to the design efforts, but also a testament to the importance of librarians and the library system in a community. Okay, and it just won a local award, didn't it? Mm-hmm. Right, an honor award. And of course, this is on a place in the South Side that was a very important place of culture for many generations. It was a place of agriculture back at the turn of the century. It is extremely close to the San Antonio missions, to Mission San Jose, now a World Heritage Site. And most of the people in San Antonio in the course of the 20th century remember it because it was a drive-in theater. Next. And I love the idea that a cultural landscape can have beauty and be important, even if it's in a poor neighborhood. So this gives you an idea of, over the course of that period of time, from the charro tradition, from the tradition of Mission San Jose, on a place that is connected to the most important urban space in San Antonio, the San Antonio River, in a place whose demographics, right, whose per capita income wouldn't be the envy of most places any longer, that something important can happen and that you have to look deeper at what constitutes beauty and culture next. So that'll just show you. There's the drive-in theater and the library and the mission next. And there's the idea of a piece of modernist architecture that celebrates the materials of the mission. That stone on the building is the same stone that the missions are built out of, sandstone, which actually is a reflection of the two aquifers in San Antonio, the limestone being to the north, the sandstone being to the south next. And beautiful exterior space, which has always been an important part of the tradition here in San Antonio. And I love wrought iron, so the wrought iron next. And imprinted on the building are all sorts of symbols that have been passed down from time, including the original designs that were on the Mission San Jose used to be colorfully painted. You don't see that anymore except for a place that's about this big. But all of, go back, all of this pattern next, and this pattern are the patterns that you would have found on the mission that at one point were the entire facade of Mission San Jose next. And this tile, when I first started my career in architecture, you used to drive down Roosevelt Boulevard and there were several places where people in their backyard would make this kind of tile. Now this kind of tile I think costs like $3,000 a foot, but back then you would just go buy it from the man who had learned how to do it from his father or his grandfather in Mexico, and you would go from house to house and choose the pattern that you wanted. And back in the 1960s, when O'Neill Ford became a very important architect nationally and was celebrated for his particular brand of modernism, those domed ceilings, bóvedas, were done, for example, at what is the Marriott Hotel, I think now, and at his home, Willow Way, next to Mission San Jose. But nobody had done those kind of structural dome ceilings for many, many years in San Antonio. We brought those back. There was a story that O'Neill would give his workers a few cases of beer to make sure that the mortars weren't perfect. Those were kind of messy. He liked that. And I just think this is beautiful, that you can see from the tile with the bóveda to these beautiful light fixtures. And if you stare out of the stacks in the library, out that window, you see the Mission San Jose. Next. And this is really the library system's work. Next. Next. And this is just the idea that really when you come from a people who have never had their stories told, that every single detail, every opportunity that you have to imprint upon a building the story of those people becomes very, very important. Next. Library at night, it's really beautiful. Light's important to libraries, and I think this pretty much sums up why this building has been so successful nationally, because it tells a story of a cultural story of who we are as a people. It's a successful library, and it also has become a place where, as libraries want to be nowadays, bring resources into a community like your library that didn't exist before. Next. And this is a project that several of us in the room worked on. It was it came at the end of the last presidential election, which was crazy, but a month, not even a month, right, Teresa, after the election, we did a big installation at Art Basel in Miami. So I thought I'd show you this, because this is a phenomenon called rascuachismo, where people have which can have a positive and a negative connotation in the Mexican and Mexican-American culture, but basically there's a very famous paper that was written on this by Tomás Ibarra Frausto, and it's about when you come from a people who don't have a lot of money, everyday materials are important, and particularly recycling those materials are important, and that's what this art installation was about, taking an everyday material that somebody wouldn't think about building a building out of it and shattering expectations next. And a lot of the history of this project had to do with the previous, I thought it was important to take the 20 years of exploration that had led to this moment and document it. So all of the buildings, on both sides of the border, the place, this was on Zarzamora, I'm not sure it exists anymore, but I always loved that place that was a combination fruit stand and automotive shop. And the beautiful colors of it and the way that color really was inherited from the color in Mexico, and how graffiti artists were always expressing themselves and branding the things that they have. The same way that cattle ranchers brand their cattle, they were doing the same thing with their neighborhood, and the places where that had happened formally, like that is a picture of a play underneath that expressway is a place in Los Angeles called Chicano Park. And I fell in love with there's a famous resistance artist from China by the name of Ai Weiwei. And I thought, well, it'd be cool to do a cube like Ai Weiwei out of Mexican soda bottles. So, next. And they allowed us to do it in the design district. So these are the original construction drawings for that cube. Next. And that's the cube at night. And thousands of people came to see it. I think they were amazed. I think in this building project there were 17, I think we used 17,000 Jarritos bottles. Next. And that just shows you how it was built. It had to be built in less than a week. Next. Next. And all of the photography around this site was the photography of the buildings that we had been enamored with over the course of 20 years. Next. And other things besides buildings, artwork. Next. Next. And we didn't really know it until we went down about 2 months before. And if you go there today, it is filled with every single luxury shopping experience you could possibly want, from Louis Vuitton to Hermes to, and so we decided that to screen off the place where we're building, we'd have these bouncy castle buildings because, well, if you go on the west side today, right, you probably drive by somebody's house who's renting bouncy castles for $175 for the weekend. And we just like that, and so we came up with these crazy names, like it was breakfast tacos at Tiffany, and Gucci with multiple C's, and Louis Vuitton, but L-U-I-S. And at the last minute, when we had to send the design documents to the developer of the district, he made us strip all the names off of the building. So even at that point, you still had some, I guess I'll call it resistance. Next. And there's an idea of breakfast tacos at Tiffany. We actually brought a taco truck out. Next. And there's somebody with a Hermes bag jumping in the Hermes jumping castle. Next. Next. And became pretty famous. Like in a period of just about a week, it went all over the world. And we love the idea that, of what really is a San Antonio experience, and which I think is an American experience of the 21st century, which is not what people would have you believe during this election year, that there's a mestizaje, right, that is the United States of America. Even if you're not a Hispanic, we're not a pure society, we're a blended society, and that's what San Antonio has done better than other places around the country. Next. Next. And I've always had a fascination with graffiti, so we exported our own graffiti artist, and he created the logo for this. Next. And then Teresa's boss, Robert Rodriguez, did a big outdoor concert there, which was very successful. There were a few thousand people there. I think that's important because Robert, who grew up in San Antonio, really in the American film business, has had a greater impact on the film industry from the time he was a very young boy walking around Monte Vista with a 16 millimeter camera to the things that he's doing today, having his own television channel called El Rey, and we were very honored that he agreed to be a collaborator on this project. So there was a different kind of design, not a traditional architecture, more of an art installation, multimedia experience that cobbled together, if you will, the talents of a lot of people from different backgrounds. And my favorite part was on the last day that we actually deconstructed the installation by letting people take jaritos home, 17,000 of them. And there you go. Here's, I thought it'd be interesting to show you a project that you may have read about over the course of the last year or so that started, Bryce, when about 5 years ago, we actually took an idea to the county that again was a story that many of our families, probably Charlie's mother, Bertha, would remember. But this ditch was one of the most important waterways in the United States. It most likely was the place of the original founding of San Antonio at the intersection of the indigenous people with the Spanish. So we have this romantic vision of how we started as a community, and we celebrate the Alamo, but in reality, this is probably the place where it all began. And it was connected to the, I don't know if you know this, but you know where the San Pedro Library is, right? San Pedro Park is the second oldest public park in the United States. Most people don't know that. The only park in the United States that is older than San Pedro Park is Boston Common. It's the second oldest public park in the United States. And yet, up until, I guess, Steve, in about the 1960s, really in the name of urban renewal, this whole part of downtown, much of it was demolished. So you had all of these wonderful buildings, the storytelling, primarily the Mexican-American part of downtown on this side of San Pedro Creek that was demolished to clean it up. And the creek became a drainage project. And for many people who lived in that neighborhood back then, on this one side it was this multicultural neighborhood that was not just purely Mexican-American, it was Chinese and Italian and Mexican-American. And on the other side was a more formal San Antonio, and it became a dividing line between people of color and Anglo. And so we allowed something that really for many years was the living room of our community to fall into, to become something else next. And so we took this idea to Bexar County, and because of the leadership of the commissioners, they allowed us to do a feasibility study about what would happen if you turned San Pedro Creek away from being a drainage ditch and into a linear park. We were lucky that many people around the country fell in love with the High Line in New York, so it was easy to take people to New York and show them what a linear park looked like that was a project of reuse and revisioning next. Because Steve is such a wonderful historian, he was able to explain how through the many generations of San Antonio, there was a rich history that connected this to our best traditions, not our worst traditions, because all of this thinking, which we did in collaboration with Pape Dawson, my friends at Pape Dawson, my great buddies there, we were able, I think, to work very closely with the county to offer this project as one of the signature projects toward the celebration of the 300th anniversary of our community. Next. And, you know, it's good urban design, so I think while none of these projects are ever without controversy, you should think about this project as the equivalent of designing the Riverwalk. 50 years from now, people will think about this in the same terms that they think about the San Antonio Riverwalk. All of those ideas of having a place that is iconic to the rest of the country, that symbolizes our community, that is a beautiful place to be, are embodied in this design. Next. And it's hard not to get better than what it is today. It's a very difficult project. Next. You know, I've always loved the Alameda Theater, not only because my uncle, my father, and my grandfather showed movies there, but because it was the first place in 1949 that was physically dedicated to what they called better understanding amongst people of Pan-American communities. So what they really meant was the intersection of the Americas, of Mexican America, and the United States. And the way that they did that, Mr. Lucchese, who was the owner of the Alameda Theater, insisted that the theater be integrated. So in 1949, if you were Hispanic, you had to sit in the colored balcony of the Majestic. In 1949. And this theater was a place where people came together and where really celebrated the best of Mexican and Mexican-American artistry, and in the 21st century now it is kind of the mothership, ground zero for the design of San Pedro Creek, which is a culture park. Next. Which finds its expression in different ways. Next. Next. And has some, I love this is this kind of cool light fixture that works underneath your feet. Next. Next. And that celebrates even the infrastructure that exists there today and reuses it and admits that it's a place in San Antonio that has been environmentally challenged in the past. Next. And that runs through some very tight spaces. Imagine this. This is the back of the Spanish governor's palace. So there's an alley today that backs up against one of the most important historic buildings in the, not just in San Antonio, but in the country. Next. And the fact that there's color and pattern that's been missing from this place for a very long time, and that if you want to go back, maybe the best way to heal this property is not just through storytelling, but through the layering of color and pattern and cultural identity onto this very important place. Next. And there's an important sustainability issue along this creek as well. San Antonio is a place that has always been celebrated for its waterways, for its place in the aquifer for the Riverwalk, and now San Pedro Creek will be a part of that. And I don't know if any of you had an opportunity to go down to the groundbreaking of San Pedro Creek, but it was an absolutely beautiful thing to not do just a traditional groundbreaking, but to celebrate it with art and culture, to the commissioning of a new opera. Next. And I'll just end this by telling you that there are lots of different ways to design, and I've learned that now over the course of my career. This is a nonprofit that was started by Eva Longoria and myself, really because you go to the next one. There needs to be a generation of young people who understand their power and their place in the country, and organizations that bring people together in a spirit of cultural identity. Next. And I love pictures of Eva Longoria, but this is important for other reasons, because there are today amongst the people who make decisions either at a local, state, or federal level, less than 2% of those people are Hispanic or Latino, and you can't really fix that. You can't have an accurate reflection of the country that we live in until somebody's willing to say this isn't right, like Henry B. Gonzalez so many years ago. this is one of the signature programs of that, which is the firsts. Everybody in this room is probably the first person in their family to do something, right? There you go. You're the first person in your family to be?
To go to college,
Okay.
to graduate with a degree.
Bernice, first person in your family too?
Yes, of my family. My mother didn't finish college, nor did my father.
I'm the first person in my family to be the finance chairman of the Democratic Party. I mean, everybody in this room is the first of some kind, but we never give ourselves an opportunity to explain that. That's what this is about next. I love this, because this was a conversation we just had. So well, there's Eva, and next to her is Diana Guerrero, who's on Orange is the New Black and has become now a very famous author who speaks primarily to young Latinas about their ability to do pretty much anything as long as they set their minds to it. And standing next to her is Melissa Mark Vivarito, who is the Speaker of the New York City Council, who will probably be the first Latina mayor of New York City. And hugging me is one of the most famous restaurateurs in the entire country, a person who came from Spain, who's an immigrant to this country by the name of Jose Andres, an incredible activist and speaker, and lurking over to this side is Maná. I didn't know who Maná was, but I think Maná is, they're very famous, a Spanish language rock band, right? They're really famous, right? Yeah, okay. So there you go. And really what this is about is, no matter where you come from, or what the condition of your life, whether you're an immigrant or a second or a third generation American, you really have the ability to do whatever you want. It's absolutely incredible. Next. So this is a picture of me and Hillary Clinton, but this is not a political picture. What this is about is that same idea, that a little boy from San Antonio, right, can get to the point where he has the ability to tell the President of the United States, this is really important. It's really important that you listen to this. Next. Why? Because there's so much work left to do. It's a picture of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I had the privilege of attending the opening of 2 weeks ago, just steps from the Washington Monument and from the White House. Next. There were thousands of people gathered on the mall to witness the opening of this very important building. It's a beautiful piece of architecture. I love it. I love the ironwork. It looks like the Museo Alameda. So I think it's a building that's made out of hojalata. So I've always liked it. I'm glad I got to go inside of it. But my favorite moment was this moment when President Obama rang a church bell that was over 200 years old, with that woman and her family, who is 94 years old, right? The daughter of a slave. So her story is told on the mall in Washington, D.C. So if you can't pick up the phone and call the president, how are we ever going to convince the United States government that it's time to build the next museum on the mall in Washington, D.C., which will be the Smithsonian American Latino Museum? Right? That's how I first met President Obama, as chairman of this commission to study whether there should be a Latino museum on the mall in Washington, D.C. What was the answer? Of course, you have to have a Latino museum on the mall in Washington, D.C. The mall, the most important public space in the United States, the place where we go to protest, the place where we go to celebrate, the place where we tell the stories about who we are as a nation. Because on that space, you have to tell the stories like the stories of the two Henrys. right? Until there is a place in Washington, D.C. where you can tell the story of Henry B. Gonzalez and Henry the Fox Muñoz, then the American story isn't there for you, or for baby Chris, or for any of us, right? That's why the intersection of politics and design is so incredibly important, because you can't really leave the future of this country thinking that demography is destiny. It's not. That's the important lesson for 2016. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. What's important is that you make your voice heard, that you get up out of your chairs, and that you register to vote, and you make your voice heard, because the future of the country really is in your hands. Look at that. Look at that. That's the opening of the American Indian Museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C. So one of these days, I hope I'm around long enough to see it, the same will be done for the Latino community of the United States. And I like to think that the San Antonio experience, I mean, think about that. Think about the people, Willie Velasquez, Henry B. Gonzalez, Henry Cisneros, Julian Castro. 2 weeks ago, Sandra Cisneros in the White House getting the National Medal of the Arts. Think of all of those incredible minds that were born here, you know, impacting this country. Next. So I'll just leave you with this. This is, you probably didn't know this, Charlie, but this is a piece of poetry that your father read in the eulogy for my father, which was from, we used to have to go home and watch labor leader training films when I was a little boy, so I'm sure I'm the only person who had to go home and watch labor leader training films on the block. But I think on Friday evenings, after my dad had had a few drinks, he'd pull out that 16 millimeter projector in our den and show us these films. And this is from a film called The Inheritance, and it's all about the immigrant experience that's built this country. Right? It's a beautiful piece of poetry that I think has a really important lesson for the American people. You know, basically, freedom is not a birthright. It wasn't handed to your people on a silver platter. You have to work for it and fight for it and day and night for it, and every generation has to earn it all over again. Every generation has to earn it all over again, particularly in a year like 2016, when what kind of country we want to build is on the ballot. So I really think it's important that all of you who have given your life to public service in one way or another do exactly what this says. Pass it on to your children. Pass it on. Thanks for helping me celebrate Hispanic heritage with you.
What do you hope, how do you hope the river expansion, thank you, San Pedro Creek, how do you hope that will continue to evolve even after it's, done, after the next phase? Where do you see that going?
I think there's probably 3 or 4 phases to San Pedro Creek. So really what we're building between now and the 300th anniversary in 2018 is a phase 1 that will extend from about the fine silver building or around Fox Tech down to, we're hoping, how far do you think we'll make it, Nueva?
Governor's Palace.
Governor's Palace. So there'll be a phase 2 that'll go all the way down to really Southtown. And there is a building, I'm not sure many people know that, but the same gentleman who designed the National Museum of African American History and Culture is designing a museum in San Antonio.
Pace.
Linda Pace is the Pace Foundation headquarters. So I think it's going to be a really amazing building. That's phase 2. I'm hoping that in phase 3, something will happen. Maybe VIA will have to move their headquarters, and you'll be able to connect San Pedro Creek back to San Pedro Park, which is the place where it started, where the springs are, and where it makes a lot of sense for it to be. There's a couple of things that are already beginning to happen. You know, I think the city and the county have entered into a joint request for proposal to start to think about the creek not just linear, but the way that people will add to it, enhance it off of the creek. So I'm hoping it'll be a place of culture. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. All of the things that were controversial at the beginning of this, when we designed the Leaning Tower of Pesos, are still controversial today until they're built. You know, I remember that San Antonio was a place where, you know, some of the members of the establishment didn't like the public library because it was enchilada red. So, you know, kind of, right? You kind of have to get through these issues tough, you know, do what you have to do, be tough, read about yourself sometimes in ways that you don't like to read about it, and then know that at the other end, 20 years from now, hopefully you've done some good that will last and be enhanced in the community. So there's years and years and years, I think, of development along San Pedro Creek. It will, I mean, without question, it will be as important as the Riverwalk. Let me tell you a story about that, though. Okay, it's an interesting story, right? Last year, about this time, just in terms of American history, people don't think about American history being Latino, right? So we have this, again, this mythology of the founding of the United States, that it was established at Plymouth Rock with the Pilgrims, which is not true, right? So the oldest community in the United States is in Florida, and what's its name? San Agustin, right? And last year, San Agustin celebrated its 400th anniversary, and Tim Kaine, who's running for Vice President of the United States, he may not be now, but he's on the ballot, but he was the chairman of the United States-Spain Council. And so he invited me to go to San Agustin for the 400th anniversary so that I could see how they celebrated their birthday. And I invited our mayor to go with me, and they gave us an opportunity to meet with the King and the Queen of Spain. And so the mayor was able to extend an invitation to the King and Queen of Spain to come to San Antonio for the 300th anniversary, and they are coming. So there you go. Anyone else?
How can a young person in San Antonio become involved with the Latino Victory Project?
That's so easy. You know, go online and register online at Latino Victory, and there. I am very proud of the fact that I didn't say it here, but the number one job of Latino Victory is to develop the next generation of public leaders. It doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. So there is I didn't know this when I started that, but the LGBT community, for example, has what they call a victory fund. And every time a president comes into office, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, if they're looking for a qualified person to take on a job in the government, they go to the Victory Fund, and the Victory Fund keeps a database of young people or more established leaders, and they click on their database. They need somebody who knows how to print money, Charlie Gonzalez, so they're running the mint. So they click on and they say, oh, there's 3 gay people in the country who've had previous experience at, you know, printing money. And then those resumes that have already been through a vetting process go to the White House, and there's so much progress made by the LGBT community to place people in positions of power in Washington, D.C. because of that. So if you go online to the Latino Victory Foundation, you register to become one of their future leaders, and they'll respond to you, and then they'll give you an opportunity to either volunteer or to be considered for a position, either a job, don't go anywhere, or a volunteer position. Important work. Yes, ma'am.
This is
in regards to the Museo Alameda.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I was a member of the museum, and you mentioned in your speech that lessons were learned from trying to create the museum. Can you elaborate on what those lessons have you learned?
Well, it's interesting that in 2016, we're almost back to the same place that we were in 1997. So the idea of a place that is, there is a, I don't know if you know, there is a study that's being done right now to determine what the future of the Alameda Theater should be and how it should work with other institutions in the city, including Texas Public Radio, which I was also a part of. There are a lot of, to me, I should probably tell you a story about how that all began. So we started a foundation to restore the Alameda Theater. And we started by raising, I think we raised about $4.5 million to restore the office building and to secure the Alameda Theater because it had a leaky roof and the murals were being destroyed. And so we restored that office building, right, and secured the building. And about the time that that project was finishing up, we had a visit. It was the sesquicentennial of the Smithsonian Institution. And the secretary of the Smithsonian came to San Antonio, and out of that conversation was born the idea to turn the Centro de Artes into a museum, right? And so that was, 10 years and about $15 million raised in private funds for that museum. Should we have completed the renovation of the Alameda Theater first? Possibly. Was San Antonio ready for a museum that is solely focused on Latino culture? Is there enough dollars in San Antonio to support an institution like that? I think I would say out of the 3 major Latino museums in the country, 2 of them are supported by significant public funding. The Museo del Barrio in New York City and the National Museum of Mexican Art in Chicago. So I think there's a lesson for San Antonio about the way that it publicly funds its arts institutions, in particular minority arts institutions, because they have an incredibly tough time across the nation. And if it can't happen in San Antonio, then I think we need to be really prepared. I view the experience at the Alameda as an incredibly important primer on whether the nation will support a national museum of Latino culture and history. I think it's an unanswered question at this point. Yes, ma'am.
You've established a great legacy of many great passion projects, and that you've really have opened a lot of doors. With that being said, what is your favorite, if you have one?
Oh, wow.
I know it's a big question for you.
You know, I probably will know. I don't think it's a project.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll tell you a story. So back in this was 1984. So after everything goes back to the leaning wall of pesos, but after that I was really questioning whether there was an architecture of the Mexican American in the United States, right? Where did it exist? What did it look like? Who had built it? I found lots of informal examples of that in the way the colors that people would paint their houses, or the way that they would treat their front yards, or the wrought iron they would apply to their homes. But I didn't really find it in a proper architecture. And the only place I could see it was at the Alameda Theater. The place that I saw it was there. It was a modern architecture of its time, the 1940s. It had a sensibility, a color. It had pattern of tile that was executed by a man named Pedro Terán. When you sat inside the theater, it told the story of the United States and Texas on one side of the wall, and it told the story of Mexico and the Americas on the other. And when you looked at the pictures from the opening night, it was all about the union of people in between the two walls. So I think I'll never probably get over the beauty of the Alameda Theater and the lesson that it has for us culturally. I'm very proud that I started a school, and that school is there, and it's one of the top-rated charter schools in the state. And every day, hundreds of young people go, and I hope that they learn the lessons of the Alameda, that the founding of this country is really a founding that is based on the mixture of people, and that's the future of the country too, and that it is, when it's expressed through artistry and culture, then, we're all the beneficiaries of that. So I think my favorite project, even though I never got to complete it, and even though, like, the museum, I would never call the Museo Alameda a failure. To me, it wasn't. I'm sad that it's not here in the same way that it was when I started it. But there are so many beautiful moments from that, and so many important lessons. And it all came from the lesson of Tano Lucchesi and the beauty of that theater. And I'll never get over it. And I'm working right now with people to help raise the money to restore it. And it's a really important place. And we're lucky that it's here in San Antonio. Thank you all.